You use the word maniacs on the outside. How are you different from the maniacs on the outside? And why do you call them maniacs? Because you know something, they think you are one.
Yeah, it would reflect. If you hold the negative up to the light, you don't see the light, you just see the negative. So I'm a reflection of your negative, there's no doubt about that, and I can handle that also. I've been handling, ain't I?
Cults. Cults are ran by very charismatic, generous, and charming mental people. And it's always boggled my brain how one person could possibly influence such a mass amount of people. They're basically like the fuckboys of humans. They reel you in with false promises and hope and dreams, and then they trap your ass for you to want out. Or to let them do whatever they want with you as long as you have the joy of pleasing that person and being involved with them. I'm your host, Britt, and this is the podcast where we focus on the dark side of life. So, without further ado, let's get into this. First one is Shoko Ashara, and I might completely bludgeon these names. I'm not very good with pronunciation of many Japanese words, so just bear with me here. Born as Chisao Matsumoto in a poor family in 1955, this kid would grow up to make a huge impact on the world that Japan knew, and not in a bright way either. Chisao Matsumoto would lose his sight early in life due to an illness he had gotten as a kid. This is when he would take advantage of this con and turn it into a pro for himself. He claimed as a blind man to be capable of reading minds, and this is when his followers appeared. He later changed his name to fit more of a spiritual, idealistic sounding name. As a man, Ashara looked the part of a spiritual man, of course. Long beard, he wore long robes, practiced meditation on silk pillows like a true guru. Just basically, he's a wizard. He had the aura of a wizard. He eventually claimed to be a second coming of Jesus Christ in his books, and he would write for his followers to consume every idea that he brought forward. Shoko had very many followers, but he didn't gain as much religious clout, as you say in this day, until 1995. His cult's name was picked out fittingly for such, being called Shinrikyo, or Supreme Truth. The cult was basically a clusterfuck of a ton of beliefs. It was a mix of Buddhism, Hinduism, Tibetan, and Christianity, along with the teachings of Nostradamus. This ideology transformed into a whole new different religion of Japan, which is Japanese Buddhism. The big deal behind this god-like idol was his delusional preachings of basically being able to take his spiritual powers and transfer it to his followers, but only if you followed him as a second coming of Jesus type idol in your life. He also pushed the idea into his followers' heads that he could take away your bad deeds and sin and give you the power that many weak people craved. Like I said before, his following hit top tiers in 1995, and it was phenomenal how many people he had turn their normal lives to the life of following him. So he had reached 30,000 people all over the world to join his cult. And these weren't even your average people looking for just belonging and validation and family and power like most cult's followers. This included very, very wise people coming from very pristine universities and huge intellectuals. So, how they became brainwashed by this person, I don't know. But 30,000 people for a cult following, guys, is insane. Like, majority of cults, yes, they have a lot of followers, but they stay in about the 300, 400 range if they're big. So, he had reached a crap ton of followers at this point. And once he gained this following, like most of the time, his ego also grew along with his power. And he went from gracing people with positivity, following wise, to manipulating his people to do whatever he asked. And that's how the biggest tragedy in Japanese history, as far as mass killings, have gone, basically became a thing. It was the end of March 1995 when Shoko and his followers did their first brutal attack on what they saw as the end of times versus the Japanese government. Now remember, the cult also followed Nostradamus' teachings, and a huge part of these teachings, along with the rest, is the end of times, Armageddon basically. The cult took to the Kasumigaseki train station early in the morning during rush hour, with Japanese government officials all over the place there at the time. They did what they believed would put a hold on Armageddon for the time being. They went out with a full-on attack of the station, believing if they developed the nerve agent sarin, they could wear off potential disasters of the end of times. Now, obviously, these disasters didn't take place, but nonetheless, the cult members waged war and unleashed the nerve gas sarin on 5 packed subway trains. Around 5,000 people were harmed by the toxic gas, and 13 people were unalived. However, this wasn't even the first and only attack the cult took in their existence. Before the attack on the train station, actually, they were seeking revenge on the Sakamoto family for a lawsuit that they had put on the entire cult of Shinrikyo for basically the claim that members didn't join this cult completely voluntarily. But also, if you didn't join the cult, then you were forced against your will to be there and could never leave, or you were basically manipulated or blackmailed into joining. So he did not like this at all, and so he had killed the family of the lawyer that took out the lawsuit on basically his cult, and he killed his family as well. However, sadly, this didn't even come to light until he was investigated for the attack of the train station. Ashara went into hiding after his attacks and being investigated for the murder. He held up in his group's compound for a few months before authorities were able to locate and arrest him. He was sentenced to death in 2004, and he took his last breath in 2018. As disturbing as it is to know this, even though Ashara has been dead, his cult to this day is thriving and still alive. This next runner-up you guys are going to know more than likely, unless you live under a rock. So, you may know of him, you may not. The madman himself, Charles Manson. Charles Manson was born in 1934 to a young woman in her teens. His father was never in the picture, and this absence in maturity and a father figure pushed Charles into the wrong direction very early on. Charles would start his life of crime by age 9 after his mom was sent to jail for armed robbery and left him to family basically after this occurred. At 9, he was in and out of juvie for robbery himself, along with later on prison for larceny, armed robbery, and many other types of crimes. So sadly, in this case, the apple did not fall far from the tree. After he was released from prison in 1967 for these petty crimes, he would make the move to San Francisco. And this is when he created his Manson family. Manson's beliefs were based on a race war, basically, as the later apocalypse. They called this belief Helter Skelter after the famous Beatles song of that time. And they basically thought that the end would come from a race war in America of black versus white. During this time, racism and segregation was a huge issue and fighting matter, but was also something coming to light as something that shouldn't be an issue. Because of his belief, Manson's plan was to keep himself and his followers in a cave in Death Valley until this apocalyptic race war began and ended. However, he thought, well, basically, that this thing hasn't even really started yet, and I don't want to be sitting here waiting on this thing to fire up and die for forever, so I need to kickstart it. This is where the cult known as the Manson family crimes began. They began attacking individuals and making it look like basically African Americans were attacking brutally, just harassing Caucasians. Basically framing people of color for murder and violence against white people. They would go out and attack someone and then plant their wallet or some big key to tie cops to people in the black communities of the US. It went from just attacking individuals to murdering them. And this is what began part of the notorious and vile Tate murder. Manson wanted to make a bigger impact, so he wanted to go to this rich community and hit a bigger target. Sadly, this was the same neighborhood Hollywood actress Sharon Tate lived in with her husband. And at the time, Sharon was pregnant with her first baby, and she was having a few friends over to visit. Manson played mastermind, but kept his hands clean by sending his family to destroy everyone in the house, as gruesome as they could. So Manson stayed put in a safe location, basically while his followers went to do the dirty work. The attacks began when one member of the party was leaving, being brutally murdered with a swing of a knife and multiple gunshots to them as they left the home to go home themselves. After the gunshots go off against the victim outside, the family make their way inside to continue. They tied up Tate and her guests and killed them with repeatedly stabbing along with gunshots. They completely overkilled. Like, this cult completely overkilled. They disgustingly stabbed the victims over 50 times, according to investigators, and they took the lives of her, all her guests, along with her unborn baby. But the family wasn't done with just this attack. It didn't seem to be enough for them. They didn't think it would break big enough. So they would actually join in this next orchestrated attack only one day after the Tate murders. They wanted to attack again, but they weren't entirely sure of a target. So they went to the same exact neighborhood, which is insane, and just picked a house. Unfortunately for the LaBianca family, it was theirs. Manson and his crew went into the home and attacked the grocery store owner, stabbing him 26 times, and then finished the job with his wife Rosemary, stabbing her an insane 41 times. The family after this was caught and charged, and Manson himself charged with 2 murders and then 7 other murders by proxy. Even though he technically didn't commit all the murders, he was sentenced to death. However, since California, which is where he was imprisoned, passed the abolishment of capital punishment, he would spend his life in prison until his death at the age of 83. Next is a very popular cult leader, and I would say one of the most known ones, honestly. As I call him, the Kool-Aid Man himself, Jim Jones. As a child, Jim attended church on a daily basis. He was from Indiana, and going to church, unlike most kids, was something he liked to do. After he graduated from high school, he would join the ministry of his church, along with founding the church at the age of 19. After he founded the church, he moved it to San Francisco, just like Charles Manson. After he with time became known as his followers, as the prophet, he began basically obsessing with showing and feeling power, more so with his ego being out there at this point. I forgot to mention he thought because he was a people person so much and people gravitated towards him and was known to be so charismatic, which is a common theme with cult leaders, as you'll learn. Jones thought that genuinely that he had psychic powers. He could also tell your fortune, and even as crazy as saying he could heal people from serious ailments and illnesses like cancer and being handicapped your whole life. He actually showed proof of his powers with this one too, with his actors of Friends attending his sermon and acting as the people suffering from their health problems and biggest insecurities. So there were thousands of his followers, and due to the activity and claims from some of the followers that joined and witnessed the dangerous power that Jim Jones at this point held, there came to be some allegations against him and some rumors spreading around about the church. These allegations weren't really able to be very investigated though, because Jim Jones ran from anyone and any chance to be looked into and where they could not find him. He's like Anakin Skywalker when he turned to the dark side, basically. Him, and as his cult was called, the People's Temple, moved and ran to Guyana. His cult then made Jonestown. They didn't know they were basically building their own grave in inescapable hell, though. The followers built a commune with tons of natural resources and food here. It was located in the middle of a jungle, so there had to be natural food and resources like we were created to do, basically from the beginning of times, because honestly, it was easier than having to try and get to town to get food and things. Plus, Jim Jones did not want very many people questioning his quote-unquote church. So, the egotistical, power-filled dude, in the name of Jesus, took all of his people's passports once they were there and millions of dollars from them, so that basically the ones that wanted to escape couldn't escape, and he had an escape source of income if he needed to flee from being discovered. However, the mask dropped eventually, because at a certain point, Jim Jones began to abuse drugs very, very bad. With his drug abuse growing, Jones began to get crazier and worse. So the people of the People's Temple, for a huge part, had become tortured for some part, with many of them being separated from one another, along with the insane dark things that this event is known for. Over time, Jones began controlling full-on everything, and I mean everything these people did and put in their bodies. Not all, but a good amount of the people began to be like, what the fuck? Okay, this is getting scary. I don't want to be here anymore. This is crazy, and I feel like shit, and it's awful here. So, there were basically a lot of hostages, and that's exactly what they became, was hostages. Technically, there was a good amount of the cult that followed Jim Jones directly to the grave, and if the ones who felt like they had any negative feelings towards Jim Jones or being there, if they were caught speaking on this, Jones would find out and would punish them. He was known to abuse the kids of People's Temple, faked a mass suicide to see who was genuinely there for him, along with making women please him, whether they wanted to or not. Not to mention, this rehearsal of the planned mass suicide was done not just once to get people ready for the final show, but was done many times. So I personally can't imagine how the members that wanted to run and were miserable felt when they had to do this and swallow their fear. It's basically like looking into your future and practicing your own death. So, with all the wildness going on there with the cult, a congressman had heard allegations of Jonestown and set out to investigate. They apparently interviewed family members of the followers to find out where the cult was and what was happening or what they thought of it. There was a reporter and his team that were sent out to investigate it, and they approached the cult, and while they acted like everything was good for the journalist when he was there, it just didn't play out very well. Jim was not very happy with the way that the visit went, and he was very paranoid at this point. So he ordered some of his members to go kill the team, and as the team was entering their helicopter that they had arrived in, his followers opened fire as they were leaving, and Ryan, the main journalist, along with 4 more people, were killed, but 9 other people that were with him escaped. Now, because of this, Jim Jones got scared. He knew this would be found out and didn't know what to do, so he took this time to solidify the plan and event of his mass suicide. He ordered people to drink a poison punch that would take them out, and after them, he unalived himself with a gun. 913 people were killed, with 304 of them being under 18, which is insane to me. Well, that's all the time I've got for cults right now. I need to go wash my own brain. If you guys like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more updates on new videos. Thank you guys for watching, and I appreciate having every one of you here. With that being said, stay safe, stay sane, and take care. Don't forget to follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Truific Pod. And for our merch, go to Instagram at Prism Attire Clothing. And we've got tons of themed looks along with looks directly for this show. Thank you. And we'll talk later.